Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen a total of 9 articles. There are 5 articles important for both prelims and mains, and few small articles which are relevant only for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement and I want you guys to pay attention. We know that for civil services aspirants, they would require mentoring and coaching for at least 18 to 24 months, or maybe even more than that, as many students prepare with a 2-year to 3-year timeline. So to help those students, Unacademy is presenting these multi-year subscriptions. And the best part is you have a 50% off along with free extension as provided in the table over here. You get a 9-month free extension when you subscribe to a 9-month course, and similarly 12-month extension for a 12-month course and 18-month extension for 18-month subscription. Now, these classes which have just begun under the Ignite batch in the English medium, you will be able to access all these live classes from our top educators along with the study material, one-on-one mentorship, and as well as prelims and mains test series. So if you're looking to subscribe to the program, use the code IAS English for an even further discount on these prices. So don't forget to put in the code IAS English. Now, any questions, any queries that you have regarding this, regarding your preparation strategy, regarding the syllabus, or how to read a newspaper, or which books to refer, whatever your doubts are with regard to prelims, mains, and interview, we are here to guide you and help you. And today, we will be conducting a special session tonight at 8 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. We will be conducting a Ask Us Anything session where all our educators will come live and you will get an opportunity right here on our YouTube channel from 8 p.m. onwards to ask us all your questions and doubts, and we are here to resolve them. It could be subject-specific doubts or it could be related to strategy and your preparation for the exam. So don't forget to tune in tonight at 8 p.m. The live stream is already set up. So click on Notify Me. Go to the home page of our YouTube channel and find the live stream over there and click on Notify Me so that you get a reminder and you don't miss the Ask Us Anything session tonight at 8 p.m. So with this, let's get started by looking at the first column from page number 12. This column is written by T.S. Tirumurthy, one of India's former diplomats, who has also served as India's permanent representative to the United Nations between 2021 to 22, when India held the non-permanent seat at UN Security Council. So T.S. Tirumurthy has a lot of experience in representing India at the United Nations. That was a critical time when India held the non-permanent seat at UNSC recently in 2021-2022. So the author is focused on the upcoming challenges for India at the UN, which might be posed by Pakistan, as Pakistan is all set to take its seat as a non-permanent member from 2025 to 2026. So essentially for the next 2 years, starting from the end of December, from January of next year, Pakistan would be taking its seat as a non-permanent member, and 24 months Pakistan would be holding this seat, and this could create a number of complications for India. Because the writer is very certain, based on his experience in dealing with Pakistan at the UN, that Pakistan is going to use this opportunity to target India, to bring up several issues targeting India, and this would remain the main focus of Pakistan. So here, we have a lot of insightful arguments being made by the writer, and the writer provides an assessment of how India can deal with the Pakistani challenge at the UN Security Council. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and understand what is the UN Security Council. The UNSC is one of the primary organs of United Nations, along with UN General Assembly, International Court of Justice, the Economic and Social Council, the UN Secretariat, and the Trusteeship Council. The UNSC is one of those primary organs of United Nations that was established in 1945 at the end of Second World War. And the UNSC happens to be the most powerful of all the primary organs. It has an elite representation of only 15 countries. There are 5 permanent members, which includes the US, UK and France, and Russia and China. They constitute the P5, or the 5 permanent members of UNSC, who even exercise the veto power. The UNSC becomes an elite body because of this reason, as it provides membership to very few countries, to a select group of countries. Now, if you compare this with UN General Assembly, it has universal membership from all 193 UN member states. So in that regard, UNGA is more democratic. It is more fair, where every country enjoys one equal vote, where every country has the same power to push for resolutions, and even when it comes to voting on key issues. At the UN General Assembly, all 193 UN member states have the same power. They have an equal voting right. Whereas at UN Security Council, the P5, they become elite members of the UNSC, and the organization itself becomes an elite organization because it is limiting the membership, the permanent membership, to only 5 countries, and they even enjoy the veto, through which they can defeat any resolution of the UN and any initiative of the United Nations. The veto of one country is enough to defeat a resolution which could be supported by 192 other countries. So that is why there is a lot of criticism against the very composition and the functioning of UNSC. It also has 10 non-permanent members who are elected for a 2-year term on a rotational basis. So, on a temporary basis, countries can contest these elections based on geographical representation. The seats are assigned as per a geographical quota to ensure equitable representation around the world. And the countries which are contesting from each region, if they secure the minimum number of votes, they get to be elected as a non-permanent member. These elections are held every year, and the country which is elected will hold the seat for 2 years at a stretch. So India has been elected 8 times as a non-permanent member. The most recent being between 2021 to 2022, when T.S. Tirumurti represented India, acted as the Indian permanent representative to the United Nations. So now Pakistan is filling this seat from 2025 to 26, and this would be Pakistan's 8th time as well. So the writer is examining what kind of challenges can Pakistan pose to India. How can it use the UN platform to target India, and how should India prepare for the upcoming challenge? So it's a very interesting, very insightful article. So let's take a quick look. Now, to understand this further, you should know, what does the UNSC actually do? What are the powers of UNSC? What's the role of UNSC? To understand this, I need to explain the UN Charter. I'm going slightly beyond the article to give you some additional information here. So what does the UN Charter say about the role, the powers of UN Security Council? The UNSC is responsible for maintaining peace and stability in the world. The primary goal and purpose of UNSC was to prevent another global conflict, a possible World War III, to maintain that peace and stability in the world. So as part of this mandate, the UNSC has the power to impose economic sanctions on countries which are violating international law, countries which are breaking the principles of the UN Charter. It plays a critical role in nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament. The UNSC has a mandate to ensure that nuclear weapons technology doesn't proliferate or leak or spread to rogue countries who might misuse them to build weapons of mass destruction. The UNSC has a goal to push the world towards nuclear disarmament and also to ensure that wars and conflicts are prevented. And if at all a war or conflict breaks out, to end them through peaceful negotiations, to negotiate ceasefire agreements, and to adopt such resolutions which can help in bringing wars and conflicts to an end. It also has a mandate to counter terrorism, as terrorism poses a major threat to peace and stability in the world. Countering terrorism is also part of its mandate. So this is essentially the primary role of UN Security Council, to maintain peace and stability in the world by imposing economic sanctions, by focusing on nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear disarmament, preventing wars and conflicts, and if at all wars break out, to bring them to an end to a negotiated settlement, and counter-terrorism as well. Other than this, the UNSC also gets involved in managing the UN peacekeeping forces. The UN Security Council runs these peacekeeping missions around the world in conflict zones, and it has command over the peacekeeping forces of the UN. It not only decides their deployment, but also maintains control over the authority over UN peacekeeping forces. So this is another important responsibility of the UN Security Council. So by and large, it is also responsible for upholding human rights. So one can say that this is largely the mandate of UNSC. So you can see that it deals with critical issues of global peace and security and global geopolitics. If there is a rogue country which is not following these norms and breaking international law and the principles of UN Charter and threatening global peace and stability, against those countries, the UNSC can even authorize the use of force. If there is a certain country posing a threat to global peace and stability, if there is a country which has gone rogue, which is threatening the use of weapons of mass destruction, or a country which is in direct breach of principles of the UN and the principles of international law, then UNSC has the authority to authorize the UN and its member states to use force as well, military force, to carry out a military intervention. And this is technically known as R2P, responsibility to protect. Now, this has been a very controversial power of the UNSC. For example, it was used to authorize the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 following the 9/11 attacks to topple the Taliban government, which was sheltering Al-Qaeda. So US and its allies, who formed the International Security Assistance Force, a coalition force led by US and NATO, they received approval from the UN, and UN authorized the use of force to carry out the invasion of Afghanistan post 9/11 attacks. Now, this power of UNSC has been quite controversial. In fact, UNSC has always been accused of politicizing every global issue. And within the UNSC, geopolitics gets played out because the P5 countries have all the powers with them with their veto. P5 countries have often misused their veto, and within the P5, you see a clear division between the West and the East. US, UK, France aligned on one side, pushing their own geopolitical agenda, misusing their veto to protect their allies and target their rivals. Same with Russia and China. They misuse their veto quite often to protect their friends, whereas to target their rivals. So this politicization of UNSC and the veto power has led to the questioning of UNSC itself. That's why countries like India are pushing for reforms of the UNSC. India with others like Japan, Brazil and Germany, we are pushing for a permanent seat to reflect current geopolitical realities. Because these 5 countries alone, the P5 alone, cannot be held accountable, right? They alone can't be seen as responsible for looking after peace and stability in the world. Maybe back in 1945, it made sense in that context during those geopolitical circumstances, but those circumstances have changed. Today, there are many new powers, middle powers which have risen, including India. So India has a rightful claim to be a permanent member of the UNSC as well. So that's about the composition, the role, and the criticism against UN Security Council. Now, let us discuss about what Pakistan might do during this period from 2025 to 26. How it can undermine India, how it might target India, and how India can prepare for it. See, Pakistan has always misused the UN platform to unnecessarily target India. This has been Pakistan's obsession, right? Pakistan has made a hobby out of this. So one issue which Pakistan will definitely bring up would be terrorism. Because India uses the UN platform to always point fingers at Pakistan and even present evidence to show Pakistani's state involvement in sponsoring terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and the others, which is an established fact. So obviously Pakistan would seek revenge. It would seek to retaliate against this. It would try to project itself as a victim of terrorism, right? Pakistan has always pushed this narrative that Pakistan itself is a big victim of terrorism, while it is the Pakistani state, especially the deep state, the army and ISI, which have largely funded and nurtured these terrorist organizations, which even have links with global terror groups like Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, or the Daesh. So Pakistan would even try to change the narrative, and after playing the victim card, it would definitely try to push the blame on India. It would try to blame India for certain terror attacks in Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan has been doing this from a long time. It will most likely present these dossiers, right? Presenting documents and evidence to allege possible Indian involvement, to allege that India is involved in carrying out terrorism in Pakistan. It would make an attempt to link some of the Baloch attacks or Sindh attacks carried out by the nationalist insurgent groups in Balochistan and Sindh province. And it would even try to blame the attacks by TTP, Pakistan Taliban, as Pakistan always alleges that India sponsors groups like the TTP and Baloch groups and Sindhi groups. But India has always denied these allegations, and more importantly, Pakistan has never really brought up any credible evidence to link Indian intelligence agencies with these extremist groups. So this would be another attempt to corner India, to turn the cards on India. So that is something India should prepare for. We've expected this, we have seen this in the past, and we should be expecting this in the coming days as well. Other than this, Pakistan's another obsession is Kashmir and Article 370. Pakistan will repeatedly bring up the Kashmir question. It will try to point towards India's alleged human rights violations. It would try to raise the issue of Kashmir's independence, right? It would also try to raise questions against the revocation of special status. How India unilaterally revoked the special status of Kashmir under Article 370 and changed the status quo. This is something Pakistan has been obsessed with. So Pakistan will most likely use this opportunity to target India on such issues. See, Pakistan will even get some support. Why? Because amongst the 10 non-permanent members, 5 of them are also members of OIC. OIC is another international grouping, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where Pakistan enjoys considerable support. The OIC brings together several countries with a significant Muslim population. It's an organization meant to protect the rights and the well-being and the interests of the Muslim community around the world. So Pakistan remains an influential power within OIC. It has often misused this platform to target India on Kashmir and other internal matters of India. So right now, amongst the 10 non-permanent members of UNSC, 5 of them are also members of OIC, including Pakistan, which means Pakistan will easily get more support, maybe from countries like Somalia, Sierra Leone, right? And there are others who will be part of the UNSC. So Pakistan is likely to get similar support from the OIC members who are also part of the UNSC right now. And this is something that India should be careful about. India will have to counter this argument. We'll have to create a counter support group that can stand for India's interests and push India's viewpoint at UN Security Council. So this is something that India should gear up for. Other than this, Pakistan will try to repair its damaged relationship with the Afghan Taliban. In the last 3 years, Pakistan's ties with the Afghan Taliban has suffered. Both sides have fallen apart, mainly over the question of TTP, Pakistan-Taliban. Pakistan-Taliban has been mounting major attacks against Pakistan, and Pakistan often blames the Afghan Taliban interim government of backing the TTP. Previously, Afghan Taliban had secured a ceasefire by negotiating with its counterpart, the Pakistan Taliban. But TTP has broken that ceasefire, and in the last 1.5 years, it has mounted major attacks against Pakistan. So Pakistan and Afghan Taliban regime, right, their ties have been affected, even though in the past, the Taliban was largely seen as a puppet of Pakistan's ISI. So Pakistan would try to repair this damage. It would try to regain that influence with the Taliban regime by trying to get it recognition through the United Nations. Now, don't think Pakistan is alone in this effort. Other permanent members like Russia, China, they've already recognized the Taliban regime. China in particular has officially recognized the Taliban regime and has even set up official diplomatic ties with the interim government of the Taliban in Afghanistan. So Russia, China would likely support a Pakistani initiative to get that global recognition, the UN recognition to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So this is something India should look out for, because this could enhance Pakistani influence with the Taliban regime. And that could be concerning for India, because in the past, when Pakistan and Taliban have aligned, it has been bad news for India. Right? Pakistan has used that depth in Afghanistan to nurture terror groups against India by taking the support of the Taliban. Right now, India has its own contact with the Taliban. We are talking to Taliban on our own. So we would like to ensure that Pakistan doesn't counter the Indian interests or push for a recognition and gets all the credit for that. So India would also try to play a role here. If India-Taliban relations are worked out, maybe India would also play a role in pushing for recognition to the Taliban regime so that we can counter the Pakistani influence. So that is one interesting issue that would play out at the UNSC. Other than this, there are issues such as the UN peacekeeping forces, because both India and Pakistan actually have something in common. We both are the major troop contributing countries to UN peacekeeping forces. Countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Kenya, Philippines. It is these underdeveloped countries from global south which are the largest troop contributing countries to UN peacekeeping forces. But the problem is these countries have no control over the UN peacekeeping forces with regard to their safety and well-being. This is entirely controlled by the UNSC, by the P5. India has long argued that this is unfair. India has contributed close to 2 lakh troops over the last 7 decades. And in fact, Indian soldiers have made the biggest sacrifice as well, with close to 180 Indian soldiers being martyred on these UN peacekeeping missions. But even though we are contributing those troops, risking the lives of our soldiers, troop contributing countries have no role to play. They have no role absolutely in the decision-making process concerning these UN peacekeeping missions. The P5 countries, which barely contribute to the peacekeeping missions, they have full control over the deployment and the safety of the peacekeeping forces. This is something India has always opposed. So India, Pakistan have a common ground here. Possibly we can use this to work together. So don't think we always fight and oppose each other. There are grounds and platforms where we can possibly work together. Even issues like climate change, sustainable development goals. So there are plenty of opportunities if Pakistan shows the willingness, right? If Pakistan shows that willingness, there are opportunities available where India, Pakistan can work together. For example, I still remember back in 2012, there was a similar situation where Pakistan had become a non-permanent member, and very soon India also became a non-permanent member. So in that particular year, both India, Pakistan were at UNSC as non-permanent members. So it was very interesting to watch back then how India, Pakistan actually worked together. They coordinated with each other. They helped out each other on certain critical issues of mutual concern. So since both were non-permanent members back then, we did see some kind of cooperation between the two, which was quite rare. But now Pakistan would be the only non-permanent member. India would not be holding that seat. So what I'm saying is that even though Pakistan would try to target India, most definitely, right? It would obsess with issues like terrorism, Kashmir, etc. But there are avenues available for India, Pakistan to work together as well, if Pakistan shows the willingness. Other than this, there are a few other issues that Pakistan is trying to focus upon. For example, it is desperately trying to bring in a religious angle to the question of terrorism. See, India has always countered all forms of terrorism, irrespective of the religion it's coming from, or irrespective of the place it is coming from, right? India often doesn't distinguish between so-called good and bad terrorists. And India has always pushed for a uniform definition of terrorism. In fact, India has pushed the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism at the UN, which has not been adopted, unfortunately, due to the lack of global support. So while India pushes for combating terrorism through the UN, what Pakistan has done is that it has tried to turn the narrative by giving a religious angle to this. Whenever countries like India bring up the question of terrorism, Pakistan tries to turn this into an argument about Islamophobia. In fact, Pakistan with few other countries have even pushed UN to adopt a resolution related to Islamophobia. And the writer points out that there has been attempts by Pakistan to designate a Hindu terrorist or a Hindu sounding name, an individual with a Hindu name as a terrorist, to pin the blame on India as well and to give that a religious color. So Pakistan has often played such divisive geopolitics on religious lines, right? It tries to exploit that and gain sentiment and gain support, right? Gain some sympathy, right? By turning this about Islamophobia, about how other religions have often targeted Islam, while that is not India's concern or India's push, right? And T.S. Tirumurti points out those instances as well. Repeatedly, whenever India has tried to use platforms like 1267 Sanctions Committee, the 1267 Sanctions Committee under UNSC is available to list global terrorists from Al-Qaeda, Taliban and ISIS or Daesh. So these global terrorists are designated and accordingly sanctions are imposed on them. And India has ensured that several wanted terrorists are sanctioned and listed by the 1267 Sanctions Committee. So whenever India makes such an attempt, Pakistan tries to turn the narrative that countries are targeting Islam, that Islamic faith is under threat, while that is never India's push. India doesn't look at terrorism as a religious problem. It's more of a state-sponsored problem, right? But Pakistan has made attempts to ensure that someone with a Hindu-sounding name is designated as a global terrorist as well. And Pakistan has pushed for that so that it can just pin the blame on India. So it is this exploitation of the platform which concerns India, which bothers India. Now, recently, for example, we have used the Sanctions Committee to get Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar and other top terrorists, Zakir Rahman Lakwi, all from Lashkar-e-Toiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed. And such top terrorists have been designated by the Sanctions Committee. But what is shocking is that Pakistan is yet to act against them. So this is something India keeps highlighting and pushing. Now, recently, India pushed for the designation of a Pakistani-based terrorist, Abdul Rahman Makki, the deputy leader of Lashkar. And for the first time, India itself was proposing the name. Previously, when you look at Masood Azhar, Hafiz Saeed and others, those terrorist names were proposed by other UNSC members like France or US. But this time, India and US together were co-sponsoring the name in 2021-22. And for the first time, an India proposed name was accepted by the 1267 Sanctions Committee. And Abdul Rahman Makki was listed as a UNSC sanctioned terrorist. So it shows that India has used the platform effectively to counter terrorism, to pin down Pakistan and its state sponsorship of terrorism. So this is something that Pakistan would keep in mind, right? Pakistan holds that grudge to seek retribution against India. It would try to use the term, the 2-year term, to pin down India on all these points. So, as I said, there are areas available for cooperation and India should be prepared to counter the Pakistani narrative. India will have to form its own alliances, build up its own support base from other non-permanent members and permanent members so that we can counter the Pakistani propaganda. So, based on this, you can anticipate a possible question. UPSC might ask you, what challenges should India anticipate for the next 2 years, given that Pakistan is now going to hold the non-permanent seat at UNSC? So if you can bring out this argument and list out these pointers, that should be more than sufficient. Now let's move on and look at the next article from page number 12. This column focuses on urban local bodies, or ULBs, or city corporations, municipal corporations, the critical role they play in local urban governance, and the importance of holding periodic elections as envisaged under the 74th Constitution Amendment Act. That is the focus of this article. So let's take a quick look. The 74th Constitution Amendment Act was a revolutionary step. The 73rd and of course the 74th Constitution Amendment Act, they provided constitutional status to local governance in the country for PRIs or Panchayati Raj institutions under the 73rd Constitution Amendment Act, and for municipal bodies under the 74th Constitution Amendment Act. So urban local bodies were empowered through this constitutional amendment, and this basically streamlined urban governance. Urban local bodies, they play a pivotal role. They deliver the last mile service in our urban areas, from paving the roads to city planning to ensuring the basic public services, right, which keeps our cities running, managing property, managing the traffic, right, planning the infrastructure development of the city, delivering basic services like waste management, sewage management, etc. So these local bodies play a critical role. And today for India, urban management, urban governance is becoming all the more important. Why? Because as of now, more than 40% of our population resides in cities. And studies have clearly established that by 2050, by the middle of the century, more than 50% of India's population will be residing in cities. By the middle of the century, more than half of the country's population, that is close to 0.7, 0.8 billion people, will be living in Indian cities and towns. This makes urban management, urban governance all the more important. That's where the role, the responsibility of urban local bodies becomes critical, right? So studies have shown that India's urban population will contribute nearly 60% of the country's GDP. Our cities and towns will be the growth centers of the country. Largely, the country's growth would be delivered through our cities and towns, where all the manufacturing industries, service-based industries would be concentrated. So we are expecting around 60% of GDP to come from here, with more than 50% population living in these cities and towns. So don't you think they deserve better governance, better services at the urban level? And this cannot happen without periodic elections. Local governance will not be responsive, it will not be participative, unless and until periodic elections, timely elections are held, unless and until true decentralization is provided as far as the urban local bodies are concerned. So that is the core point that the writer here is examining. Now see, in India we have seen many reports, many committees that have looked at the issue of simultaneous elections. Right now there is a lot of talk about one nation, one election. In fact, we even have another article in today's newspaper related to it, because just yesterday the Union Cabinet has approved 2 bills to be introduced in the winter session to make one nation, one election a reality. So we will discuss that as well. We'll come to that point. So there has been a lot of debate about one nation, one election, but this debate has been largely restricted to simultaneous elections for the parliament and the legislatures. Now, for example, if you look at the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice, which had studied the issue of simultaneous elections and gave a report back in 2015, it did not support simultaneous elections for urban local bodies or local bodies in general. Then we had Niti Aayog, which also looked at this issue. In 2017, the Niti Aayog did not support simultaneous elections for urban local bodies. Clear? Then we had the Law Commission of India, the draft report of the Law Commission of India in 2018, which also did not support simultaneous elections for urban local bodies? Because the main focus of simultaneous elections has largely been synchronizing the elections of the parliament, the general elections at the national level, and the state level assembly elections. So all these previous committees which have looked at this issue, they have not really considered simultaneous elections for urban local bodies, be it the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice, the Niti Aayog, or the Law Commission of India. But however, the high-powered committee that was recently appointed by the Modi government under the chairmanship of Ramnath Kovind, the former Indian president, to study and provide recommendations on simultaneous elections, it included urban local bodies under its mandate. If you look at the recommendations of the high-powered committee, the Kovind committee, it has recommended the rollout of simultaneous elections, not just for general elections to the parliament and assembly elections at the state level, but it has recommended that within 100 days of one nation, one election being rolled out at the center and state level, it should be extended to local bodies as well. So thus the Ramnath Kovind committee has brought urban local bodies, Panchayati Raj institutions under its purview and recommended that simultaneous election should be conducted even for local bodies. But however, the government is not inclined to provide for this implementation. Why? The Modi government is very eager to roll out simultaneous elections for the center and the state, for parliament and assemblies, because this won't require the approval of more than 50% of the states, right? Under the constitution amendment which would be necessary to make these changes, the center need not wait for the approval of 50% of the states if the push is only for simultaneous elections with regard to parliament and state assemblies, because that would still be under the purview of the center. But if local bodies are also included, let's say if the government has to implement the recommendation of Ramnath Kovind committee on simultaneous elections for local bodies, then this would require 50% of the states to approve the constitution amendment, which might be difficult to achieve. And hence the government is not inclined on including this proposal. In fact, if you look at the bills that were approved yesterday, it does not include simultaneous elections for local bodies. It only covers general elections to the parliament and assembly elections to the legislatures. Is this clear? So writer here expresses a concern because previous studies have shown, for example, a CAG audit showed that 60% of the urban local bodies, they do not hold timely elections. Now this is a matter of concern. Without proper elections and periodic elections, how will accountability be fixed? Who will exercise those responsibilities as far as urban governance is concerned? So CAG audit has shown that we have close to 4,700, 4,800 urban local bodies, right? Imagine 60% of them don't hold timely elections. And in fact, even if they hold elections, there is an inordinate delay in the election of the mayor, the appointment of the chairperson or the standing committees, which actually play an important role in urban governance. These key positions are not filled for several months, even after elections. So this essentially defeats the purpose of urban local bodies, right? That is not what was envisioned in the 74th Constitution Amendment Act. So this is where the role of state election commissions become critical. The state election commissions, right, under 73rd, 74th Constitution Amendment Act, they need to be empowered. Some states have empowered the State Election Commission to even conduct delimitation. But many states, right, they largely still retain control over these local bodies and the elections to local bodies. So this defeats the very purpose of decentralization if the states are still controlling urban local bodies. So this is where the writers believe that there should be a push for simultaneous elections to local bodies as well, especially urban local bodies. And the writers are supporting a stronger state election commission, a more empowered state election commission, so it can conduct periodic elections, ensure that at the end of the term, regular periodic elections are held, the required vacancies are filled, and this is what can bring responsive, accountable, effective governance, especially at the third tier of administration. So please take up this question. Urban local bodies play a critical role in local governance, and hence periodic elections are pivotal to their effectiveness. Discuss. So let's see if you guys can write an answer to this question. Next, on the front page. On the front page, we have a few important articles. So let's take a quick look. The Supreme Court has freezed any further suits being filed at local courts and civil courts. And also it has freezed any orders or decisions that can be passed by local courts on questions related to Places of Worship Act. We have recently analyzed the Places of Worship Act in detail. This 1991 law, it froze the religious character of a place of worship as it existed on 15th August 1947. To maintain communal harmony in the country, to ensure that there are no unnecessary challenges, legal challenges regarding the religious character of a place of worship, this law was introduced during the heightened communal tensions around the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi Ayodhya title dispute issue. So it was pushed through under the then Narasimha Rao government, and it gave an exception to the Ayodhya title dispute because the matter was already sub judice. So this law excludes the Ram Janmabhoomi Ayodhya title dispute, but other than that, every other place of worship, they will maintain and retain the religious character as it existed on 15th August 1947. That is on the day when India became independent. So on this day, if there was a Hindu temple, it will remain a Hindu temple. If there is a mosque on 15th August 1947, it should remain a mosque. But however, of late, number of suits are being filed at local courts, especially trial courts and local courts, alleging that mosques have been built on old Hindu temples, which were allegedly destroyed by Muslim rulers, Mughals, Islamic invaders, for example, etc. So by citing these historical references, the petitioners will often push for a survey. They will often get orders issued by local courts to open up the matter, to hear these cases, which could have a detrimental impact on the society. Because one were to open up historical wounds, and if the local courts were to entertain such petitions, just because there are claims that possibly a mosque was built by razing down a Hindu temple hundreds of years ago, if such trends are generally encouraged, right, this could lead to communal tensions. It could harm the communal harmony in the country. Now, of late, several such cases have come up, be it the cases in Varanasi with regard to Ajmer Dargah. Then if you look at the Sambal controversy recently, right, Gyanvapi controversy, and many others. So around the country, there are 18 such suits which have been filed over 10 religious places. And the numbers are increasing regularly. If one dispute in 91 could lead to large-scale communal divisions, polarization, and riots, right? Imagine how if these issues are misused by radical extremist groups or political organizations, this could unnecessarily harm the social fabric of the country. So Supreme Court has intervened because Supreme Court is already hearing several petitions which are challenging the constitutionality of this law itself. There are petitioners who are arguing that Places of Worship Act is unconstitutional. So Supreme Court is already looking at that. So meanwhile, trial courts at the lower level are already accepting such suits and even passing interim orders and ordering for surveys to be conducted or the place of worship to be closed for some time, asking for a proper excavation as well through Archaeological Survey of India. So when such orders are issued at the local level, and this could further instigate communal sentiments, and it could harm the social fabric of the nation. So Supreme Court of India has taken a call. A bench headed by the Chief Justice of India has clearly stayed any such suits from being accepted going forward. So local trial courts cannot accept such cases under Places of Worship Act. And Supreme Court has said we are already examining the constitutionality of the law itself. So let's look at this first. Let the Supreme Court decide trial courts can't be in competition with Supreme Court here. So Supreme Court has put a stop to any such interim orders or surveys which are ordered by local courts. It has even basically prohibited these local courts from taking up such cases and suits. Because Supreme Court is already hearing several similar cases related to Places of Worship Act. Right? The Gyanavapi controversy, the case has already reached the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court is already looking at some of these cases, plus it's examining the constitutionality of the law itself. So that's why the Supreme Court has decided that there should be a freeze on these suits, and local courts should be prohibited for now from taking up such cases and even passing any interim orders on such sensitive cases. So that is an important development. Next, the Union Cabinet has approved two important bills for introducing simultaneous elections in the country. As we were discussing, based on recommendations of the Ramnath Kovind High-Powered Committee, which recommended the introduction of simultaneous elections, the Modi government has drafted two bills which require constitutional amendment in order to make one nation, one election a reality again. So the government has drafted two bills which were approved by the Union Cabinet yesterday, and very soon they are expected to be tabled in the ongoing winter session. So one of the bill will seek to amend the constitution, to amend the necessary constitutional provisions to introduce simultaneous elections, right, which includes Article 324, while the other seeks to amend the laws related to the term of the legislative assemblies of certain union territories like Delhi, Puducherry, right, and now Jammu and Kashmir as well. These are UTs with a legislature, with an elected legislature. So their terms either will have to be extended or curtailed so that their terms will align with the terms of the other state assemblies. Similarly, the term of the state assemblies will have to be extended or curtailed. That's where a constitutional amendment becomes necessary, right? So that simultaneous polls can be held. So by the time the next general election happens, right, if hopefully everything goes as per the plan, the terms of certain assemblies will be curbed or curtailed, or the terms of certain assemblies will be extended to synchronize all the legislatures so that simultaneous polls can be held. Now, this again is a highly controversial, divisive topic. It is argued that simultaneous elections are very good, beneficial for the country. The government, which has been a proponent, various committees which have supported it, including Election Commission of India, has always backed simultaneous polls, because at one point in 1960s, we did have, from 1950s to 60s, we did have simultaneous polls. This cycle was broken with the premature ending of certain state assemblies, starting with Kerala, right? With the imposition of president's rule and hung assemblies coming up in 70s and defection becoming a norm in the 70s and 80s. Several state assemblies prematurely ended their term, leading to fresh elections, and thus a mismatch occurred between the parliamentary elections and legislative elections. Now the attempt is to synchronize them, which means the term has to be altered of certain assemblies to bring them on par with the parliament. Now, the government and the proponents argue that this will save cost, right, which is a very good argument. Election Commission incurs significant expenditure on the conduct of elections, and now every year there are elections happening in the country in some state or the other, right? Every 5 years there's a general election, and every year there are few state elections happening. So this becomes a huge burden on the government machinery itself. The bureaucracy, right, which is the backbone of the conduct and holding of elections, they're always in election mode, which distracts them from administration, from governance. And don't forget, our politicians and political parties, they're always in campaign mode because of this. They're always seeking votes in some part of the country or the other, right? The model code of conduct, which comes into effect, could also curb governance and welfare initiatives, because every year for a few months there might be model code of conduct due to elections in some part of the country. So there are several advantages to introduce one nation, one election. It will reduce the cost, it will free up the government machinery, right? It will ensure that the majority ruling party, which is in power, right, will focus on governance and administration instead of seeking votes and winning elections by coming out with populist schemes. It will ensure that the model code of conduct is not disruptive for welfare programs. So there are numerous benefits that arise out of it. But at the same time, the critics, they have a strong opposition. They have a very strong argument against simultaneous elections. They believe that this could destroy federalism and regionalism. They argue that regional parties, small parties, stand no chance against the larger national parties. And national issues might become more important in fighting and winning elections as compared to regional and local issues. Because national level parties can always bring up foreign policy, national security issues and try to fight elections on the basis of that. Whereas local issues might get cornered. So regional parties and smaller parties at the local level may not be able to compete with the national level parties. So this might give an unfair advantage to the bigger parties, right, which have more support in general. So this could undermine federalism, regionalism. It could even go against the basic structure of the constitution, according to the critics, right? So there is strong opposition against it. In fact, after the Union Cabinet approved these bills, there has been opposition coming in from certain states like West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, which are ruled by opposition parties. So as I said, the government has decided to exclude one important recommendation of Ramnath Kovind committee, which is to provide simultaneous elections for local bodies. Because if that provision had been included in these bills, then the constitution amendment would have to be approved by more than 50% of the states. So to ensure a smooth sailing of these amendments, right, to ensure that states' approval is not necessary, the government has excluded this provision, right, and it is pushing only for simultaneous polls for now for parliament and state legislatures and leaving out the local bodies. So let's see what happens once it is introduced in the parliament. There will be a lot of articles related to this and we can discuss and examine this again. Now coming to another important development, the government has pushed a bill to amend the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The DM Act has been pivotal in transforming India's disaster management. It streamlined disaster management in the country. It brought disaster management into mainstream governance. So the Disaster Management Act had created a number of institutions. It created a three-tiered architecture for disaster management by establishing National Disaster Management Authority, State-level Disaster Management Authority, and District-level Disaster Management Authority. It provided for the funds, the National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund, a National Disaster Mitigation Fund, to finance disaster management in the country. It provided for a Professional Disaster Response Force, NDRF. It focused on implementing the 3 stages of disaster management in the disaster management cycle. It provided for pre-disaster planning and preparedness. It provided for more effective response and relief during disaster. And it provided for post-disaster reconstruction and recovery, thus implementing the global standards, including the targets laid down under Sendai framework for action with regard to disaster risk reduction. So India became fully compliant as far as the Sendai framework targets were concerned with regard to disaster risk reduction. We have incorporated these UN targets into our disaster management policy and plan. So this act has been transformational for India as far as disaster management has been concerned. Now the government is seeking to amend this. The government has pushed certain amendments along with creation of some new institutions. It's looking to replace certain words and terminologies that have been used in the previous version of the law. Because one shortcoming of the previous law is that it often prioritizes the role of the center, the concerns of the center with regard to when compared to the concerns of the state. States have often complained that disaster management is too centralized. Disaster management doesn't help the states much. The center doesn't really provide the required support sometimes. It has often led to center-state tensions and clashes as well between the center and the state. So the center says that the amendment is necessary to iron out these issues. The center is pushing for some new institutions. It is proposing that the word compensation, which was provided under the law for victims of a disaster, is now being replaced by the term relief. Because the compensation explicitly meant monetary compensation, which was necessary to protect the victims from financial ruin. But now there is criticism coming in from the opposition that government is trying to replace the word composition with the word relief. Relief could even mean just search and rescue. Relief could even mean providing food, medicines, etc. But it may not explicitly include compensation, monetary compensation, which might be necessary to protect the victims and give them financial security during a disaster. So there are certain debatable provisions which the government has been pushing. For example, the amendment doesn't even mention climate change even once. See, this was one shortcoming in the previous version of the law. When the Disaster Management Act was enacted in 2005, right, it never accounted for climate change separately. Today, as you know, climate change is driving extreme weather events. It's driving more and more disasters. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, more intense. And yet our law doesn't even mention climate change. It doesn't account for the impact of climate change on disasters, on extreme weather events. Now, the amendment as well ignores climate change entirely. So such concerns have been flagged. But once we get further details on the bill, what the government is exactly pushing for, what's the opposition in the parliament, right, then we can have a more detailed debate on this. So let's look out for this topic. And I will definitely have another discussion on this, given the big changes that are being pushed by the government. So let's go through the bill again. And once the details are clearly known, we will have one more discussion on this topic. So in the meanwhile, let me know what you think. Is there a need to amend the Disaster Management Act? Hasn't the DM Act done well for India? Or is there a need to bring in new changes? Let me know in the comments. Now, coming to the last part of today's discussion, let's take a quick look at the prelim section. On page 13, the Hindu carries a very small piece where it pays tribute to events that occurred 100 years ago and 50 years ago. Now, many of you often don't look at this section of the Hindu, but sometimes there are interesting topics that come up here. So today, there is an article related to Vaikom Stayagraha. Currently, we are marking the 100 years of the legendary Vaikom Stayagraha. So most likely, this could be a prelims topic. UPSC loves to ask anniversary questions, right? Especially 100th anniversary is a good milestone for such important historical topics. So what is Vaikom Stayagraha? Vaikom Stayagraha was a legendary revolutionary step in India's fight against the evils of the caste system that dominated the Hindu caste hierarchy. In Kerala, that is in the then kingdom of Travancore, at the Vaikom temple in the kingdom of Travancore, there was large-scale caste-based discrimination by the upper caste against the lower caste and the Dalits. In fact, kingdom of Travancore in that regard was notorious for caste-based discrimination, where the so-called upper caste would exclude, prohibit and ban lower caste and Dalits from even entering public spaces, including temples. Forget entering a temple, even the roads around a temple. For an entire block, lower caste and Dalits would be prohibited from even walking on those streets. This was the kind of atrocity that was seen in the caste Hindu society in the kingdom of Travancore. So this is where legendary leaders of the then Congress, T.K. Madhavan, Kelappan, Kesava Menon, with the support of E.V. Ramaswamy Periyar and George Joseph, they organized a non-violent satyagraha from 1924 to 1925. Eventually, this led to the involvement of Mahatma Gandhi as well, right? And eventually, a solution was worked out, even though the solution was not ideal, right? Gradually, some of the restrictions were lifted and lower caste and Dalits were allowed to walk on certain roads, but still the temple premises and the road around it was still not given access to the lower caste and Dalits. This is where Gandhi faces criticism as well, that Gandhi agreed for such an unfair deal, which did not remove untouchability, which did not go against the caste oppression. Eventually, it was the temple entry proclamation, right? And in fact, Vaikom Stayagraha played a big role in pushing for a temple entry proclamation that lifted such abusive practices in the caste Hindu society that eventually paved the way for equal access for other castes as well, right? So this is a pivotal moment in India's freedom struggle, right? And with regard to our social reforms. So please make a note. Next, from the world of sports, yesterday we got some fantastic news from Singapore, where the FIDE World Chess Championship was held. between the current champion, the Chinese Grandmaster Ding Liren, and the new superstar from India, D. Gukesh. In this legendary match, D. Gukesh from India has scripted history by breaking all records, by becoming the world's youngest chess champion. He has beaten the record of the legendary Garry Kasparov from Russia. Garry Kasparov held this record for 4 decades. Right? He was the youngest world chess champion when he won the World Chess Championship 40 years ago. So this record has been broken by an 18-year-old Indian chess champ from Chennai, D. Gukesh. This marks the rise of Indian chess, especially the young youth from India. We have the likes of Arjun Erigasi, then we have Pragyananda, right? And now D. Gukesh, who have done the country proud. As of now, Vishwanathan Anand, right, was the only one from India to have won the World Chess Championship. And now D. Gukesh has taken that place. And as the youngest in the world ever, right? So now he takes on the very legend of current grandmasters like Magnus Carlsen, right? And this is a golden period for Indian chess. And there's an editorial as well on this today. And it correctly points out that the glory in chess is returning back to India. And rightly so, because India is the birthplace of chess, right? India is where chess originated. And it is to the credit of the Indian youth, the training academies, right? For example, the mentors of D. Gukesh, Pragyananda, which includes Vishwanathan Anand, and the private sponsors, they have done phenomenally well in creating the right support system for India's chess players, right? So this is honestly the golden period of Indian chess. So one should be aware of these basic details. Next, PM Modi has laid the foundation for the controversial Ken-Betwa river interlinking project. Ken-Betwa interlinking project is part of the National River Interlinking Project, right? So under this proposal, the idea is to link the Ken River in Madhya Pradesh and to transfer the surplus from the Ken to Betwa in UP. Because the Betwa region falls under the Bundelkhand region, which is one of the most arid, backward regions in the country. And from the Ken belt, the Ken drainage area in the Madhya Pradesh region, the idea is to transfer the surplus water by building a series of canals and embankments that can transfer the surplus to the deficit Betwa region to solve the problems of Bundelkhand region. It's a very ambitious project, but it has been facing stiff opposition from environmental activists, social activists, etc. Because the project will pass through Panna Tiger Reserve. There's a possibility of the backwaters submerging large tracts of the Panna Tiger Reserve, which is seen as an environmental threat, and also the large-scale transfer of surplus water from the Ken basin to the Betwa basin could even lead to ecological consequences. So there has been a lot of opposition against it, but the government has finally gone ahead, and the PM would be laying the foundation for the Ken-Betwa river interlinking project. Coming to the last article for today, on page 20, we have an organization which is mentioned, Reporters Without Borders, RWB. See, UPSC has often asked such questions related to global organizations. In previous exams, we have got questions on organizations like MSF, Medicine Sans Frontiers, or Doctors Without Borders. We have got questions related to Amnesty International, right? So such groups could be very important. RWB, Reporters Without Borders, it essentially highlights the challenges faced by reporters, journalists. It stands for right to freedom of expression, freedom of press. And it's a non-profit, non-governmental organization headquartered in Paris. Clear? So it has brought out a report regarding the threats faced by journalists around the world, by reporters, especially in war zones. And it points out how Israel is responsible for the killing of more than 18 journalists in Gaza, in the ongoing Gaza war. So that's why the topic is in news. So just know that Reporters Without Borders is a global NGO, a non-profit organization, protecting the rights of journalists, the rights of the media, the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom of press. And it has consultative status at global organizations like UN, UNESCO, Council of Europe, and others. So these are some basic pointers that you need to remember. Clear? So this completes my detailed analysis of today's The Hindu. So if you want the PDF of the session, please join my Telegram channel, scan the QR code, and also join our official Telegram channel. The link is in the description below, because after the session, we provide a daily quiz, which will help you practice MCQs based on these topics that we have discussed. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care. And don't forget to tune in again at 8 p.m. because all our educators from Unacademy IAS English will be meeting you live. And you can ask us anything, any question on subject related doubts, your strategy or preparation related doubts, anything. So let's meet again at 8 p.m. Don't forget to tune in live on our YouTube channel. So till then, see you. Take care.